We've reached the end. One final episode. The Pacers swept from the playoffs by the Boston Celtics. We didn't recap Game 4. I didn't really want to dwell on Game 4 and what that was. I kind of just wanted to tie a nice bow on what the playoff run has been as a whole. And I wanted to involve everybody that's been listening to the episodes, that's been supporting me on Patreon through the entirety of this season and being the first full season that I've done writing independently at Basketball She Wrote. So I wanted to turn this into a mailbag episode. And as I told everybody ahead of time, typically I do the mailbags behind a paywall. But for this one, because it's Samson's last episode, I wanted to make it public. But the questions all came from actual patrons on my website. So that's where the questions are coming from. I was hoping that Samson was amenable to this. Samson, how are you feeling now that this is the end of your run covering the Pacers?
Well, you can see that my name for this podcast is Indiana Abe. That's because from ages 7 to 21, Abraham Lincoln was a Hoosier. So he had a small little part of his life in Indiana, and I feel that I have as well. I enjoyed it immensely.
Is that something that you learned in Canadian history? Indiana history was part of your course, or did you look that up in advance so that you could bring it to the podcast today?
I looked that up in advance, and because I was wondering, I wanted to say something cute and nice about my time here. And I wrote this thing back in, I don't know, the middle part of the season where I was kind of talking about team building and kind of development and all that kind of stuff. And it was like, a path isn't a path until you've walked it, you know? But I'm glad I walked this path and enjoyed the Pacers playoff run. I was trying to conjure up some nice, cute stuff, but I feel like that's the nice, cute stuff. We can talk basketball now.
Okay, so the first question, we'll just hop into it. This one comes from Rafa. The Pacers scored 44 points in the second half of Game 3, 50 points in the second half of Game 4, 19 points in the fourth quarter for Game 4, and 0 points in the final 3 minutes and 30 seconds of Game 4. Why did they get shut down?
You want to open with me, or do you want to
open with you? I asked the question.
Okay. The quick answer is, outside of the schematics, Boston was able to ratchet up some of their intentionality and their intensity in how they guarded actions as things got closer. Boston was the better team, and especially playing without Tyrese, the Pacers had to match intensity. They had to and go above and beyond, and they had to maximize every second of the game to try and build leads that wouldn't evaporate towards the end of the game. And as we saw, they weren't actually able to build a lead that was something that the Celtics couldn't climb over. That's the short, like, shock jock radio version of it. But otherwise, I think that, you know, we talked about it in a couple of the episodes. We didn't talk about it in Game 4, but the floor balance can be unique for the Pacers as they navigate what the end of the game looks like without Tyrese. The Celtics kind of flipping some of the coverages late in games and throwing different looks at guys. And also the Pacers being a team that shoots like 70% or 72% for the first half of a game and being a team that misses shots late. Some of that is like, yeah, what we talked about, ratcheting up intensity, having better coverages as the game goes on, seeing different things, but a little bit of bad luck as well. Shots don't drop sometimes. And that's the short answer, maybe.
I think it's the encapsulated answer for sure. Because, I mean, I think another aspect of you're not just missing Tyrese's shooting and Tyrese's playmaking. You're missing how closely he's guarded when he isn't shooting, right? And we did talk about that at the end of Game 3. I thought they made some adjustments to that at the end of Game 4. So just to show people, this would have been at the end of Game 3 when we were talking about, you know, Drew Holiday was really kind of playing free safety off of TJ McConnell and, you know, Pascal Siakam seeing that extra coverage. Also late in the game, there were times where Andrew and Pascal were being guarded by both wings. So if they're screening for each other, there's not really that much of an advantage there. That's not a high efficiency shot for Miles Turner be taking a step back to. Similarly, this is what I just mentioned here, that if you do get the ball, this was an adjustment that they made in Game 4 that I really liked, where then it was TJ actually moving into the dunker spot to improve that spacing, or he's coming off that get action. The problem is that in defense of TJ, he's not used to playing in end-of-game situations. When we talked about him being in the closing lineup earlier in the one game against the Knicks, I was like, one drawback of that is that he's used to playing his very TJ ball in very short spurts of minutes. And when he has to play longer stretches of minutes, there can be diminishing returns to that. And just to point out, he did get hit pretty hard in the face right before the end of this game. And then he was kind of coming up empty on some of these shots. But I like what you pointed out, because on this sideline out of bounds play, you can see ahead of time, right before they inbounded it. What has occurred here? There. You see Joe Mazzulla holding up a 1-5. Jason Tatum had held up a 1-5. That means they're going to switch 1 through 5. And I could tell when I saw that up in the arena, I'm like, yeah, the Pacers probably aren't going to get anything out of this, because something that we didn't talk about a lot, which played a big part in game 4, is that the Celtics were a team that could feasibly switch, and the Pacers were a team that really couldn't feasibly switch with the personnel that were available to them, minus Pascal Siakam. And then there was possessions like this in the second half where, like, Pascal can do something against the switch for sure, but is he actually going to touch the ball? He's posting Derek White on one side. He's posting Derek White on the other side. I was shocked when I watched this live that it got all the way around the bend and it ended up being an Aaron Nesmith catch and shoot 3 at the top, I think headed into next season. There were strides that Pacers and Pascal made in conjunction with each other and how he was incorporated into the offense. I think that could go even a step further beyond what we saw in terms of what he was doing against some of the switches. And then also, I was very kind of confused overall by Miles Turner in this game. And just to, I admit and understand that I could see him in the tunnel riding an elliptical every time he came out of the game. I could see him when he came out of the game putting on the same back contraption that Tyrese was wearing during the Knicks series because he was dealing with back spasms. Rick Carlisle said after the game that Miles had got hit in the back early on, that he had been dealing with back spasm issues himself. Miles referenced that. I understand it, but the only thing that I didn't really understand, and I don't want to stray too far into just digging into the nitty-gritty of game 4, but if he was dealing with the back issues, the Pacers went heavily to switching, especially with him. And it seems to me that if you were really stiff, why would you want him switching more? I would think you'd want to keep his radius closer to the basket and be funneling the ball to him. Also, the Celtics made an adjustment. For the majority of this game, he was being guarded by Al Horford, and he popped exactly 4 times, which again, to me, like if you're dealing with the back issue and you're stiffer, it seems like you would want to be hanging out more around on the perimeter, especially with Al Horford playing in drop. Here late in the fourth quarter, Miles was guarded by Jason Tatum, and then it's like, why are you ducking in and clogging up the spacing against Jason Tatum? Like there was just a lot of awkward moments there. So I think what Samson said accurately summarizes why, in the post Tyrese minutes when he was no longer available, that the offense dried up for the Pacers. I think the switching played a part in it. I think their ability to identify mismatches with Pascal waxes and wanes too often and needs to wax more frequently in year 2 if he resigns and he's there for a full season through a training camp. And also, if I'm being honest, I just think that some of the stuff with Miles was a little bit awkward in this game. So
maybe you can confirm this. I didn't actually see the stats of it, to your point about more wax, less wane. The Pascal post-up is still the highest scoring play type in all of the NBA playoffs. That's what Lewis had said. He had tweeted it out, and he said the only player who has a chance at beating that is Kyrie going forward, probably. So some of that is, what's the term? Aphorism that you used, some sort of pigs get fed, hogs get slaughtered. You can't post up to eternity for the exact reason. And kind of what I said on the one podcast was that, only TJ knows how to navigate TJ's spacing. It's like, it's weird to play with TJ, and TJ is you've described him as a maelstrom of something or other.
Dashing
in the
and
past.
hip swivels.
Yes, exactly. And he knows how to do that, but it leads to eventually like Drew playing off him completely as if TJ isn't there. And they have these, these things that they correct and fix and adjustments that they play out, but TJ goes 1 for 2 on some of those adjustments that they make. And there's a reason that TJ, like throughout the playoffs, is this lightning rod of like, this guy's incredible, but you look and he has a 52% true shooting, because it's like the types of shots he's getting. If he goes 1 for 2, you're like, okay, it's 50%, but it's like little short mid-range jumpers and stuff like that. Working Pascal into stuff, that's probably what made me. That's the second or third most important thing I think I saw during the playoff run. Andrew Nembhard was number 1. And yeah, I'm happy to leave that there. They have work to do.
Yeah, I mean, just to further point out, like in game 4, the Pacers switched on 40 ball screens per 100. That's almost double what they did in games 1 through 3, and also almost 10 times what they did in the series against the Knicks. And I will say I did eat my cake and eat it too on the last podcast, and I said I thought they needed to veer back switch on those pick and pops without Horford. As it turns out, that was a better way to cover Al Horford, but putting Miles Turner on the island against Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown didn't work out in their favor, especially if he was limited to the degree that the team said that he was. And I will also say, though, I still would have preferred it be a veer back switch rather than just outright switching out. But in the reverse, like I said, Boston was also switching more, especially in the fourth quarter of those two games. And what the Pacers as a team, that was always going to be the best way to guard them. Going clear back to the agrarian of buckets comment that you made in the preview pod. It's just that the Milwaukee Bucks and the New York Knicks didn't have feasible switching lineups unless they were being played by, Danilo Gallinari at the 5 or Bobby Portis sometimes at the 5. The Boston Celtics could put out very formidable lineups that allowed them to do that. And that was a standout moment to me of things that the Pacers are going to have to consider over the offseason. But we'll head into question number 2.
I really enjoyed, just as a quick thing, I enjoyed seeing the progression. And this might sound condescending, but it isn't. I enjoyed the progression of seeing the Pacers lose, get outfoxed by the Celtics and Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown and Drew Holiday, rather than Patrick Beverley, Bobby Portis, and Danilo Gallinari.
Wasn't that
a
more refreshing way of losing? Yes. Yeah. Allie, what do you attribute most to the Pacers' inability to close out 3 of the 4 games versus the Celtics where they had the lead? Inexperience, mindset? Is this a coaching problem or just a product of being young, first-time playoffs experience?
Well, I think if Rick had just coached better, they'd be in the NBA Finals right now. No, I think that you do see, like Pascal, the more gritty, the more intentional the team had to be, the better his game got. I thought the more that it became problem solving on the floor instead of just like playing within the system, the better Pascal got. And you saw some players go from where they could be fledgling creators to where it's like, okay, I'm just a finisher on the floor. Like things have to be created for me. I can still shoot, I can still cut, all this kind of stuff. But as far as like making decisions against these amoebic defenses, amorphous defenses, the guys with the guys who had been around had an easier time. And that's why getting to the playoffs and going for it and having Pascal to help stabilize probably the team through the back end of the season, so that guys like Ben Shepherd in a rookie season get to play these playoff games, 17 of them, so that Andrew Nembhard gets to play 17 playoff games. Like, that's invaluable. I don't know what the Pacers end up doing next season, but this kind of stuff, you'll reap the rewards of it. Those players will, at the very least, in Indiana or otherwise. Having that experience is really important, but also the Celtics are a really strong team. And some of that is the Pacers. There were mistakes. We saw them. We broke them down. And some mistakes were like, damn, I didn't make a good play against good defense. And some mistakes were just like, wow, the ball is out of my hands and it's out of bounds. That's tough. Experience probably helps a little bit of that, but guys need to get better. They need to become a better team. And being a better team will help solve some of that. Minnesota is right now in the thick of trying to figure that out against the Mavericks too.
And this is something that Tyrese talked about in exit interviews. He said that something that he was going to take away from this was that how much every possession matters, and not just only with turnovers, but with the rebounding as well. And that was the thing at the end of the game against Boston too. Boston came up with two very big rebounds, one of which coming from the fact that Miles got switched out to Tatum. Nesmith was like, oh, geez, Miles is switched on to Tatum. Rushes over there, it's switched to blitz, and then nobody's there to box out Drew Holiday, those types of things. And that's, the double-edged sword that the Pacers faced in the Knicks series and in this one, that there are times where they needed to double because they still have very clear defensive holes in certain places. And if they double, then that exacerbates their very clear rebounding holes that they have in certain places. I would say what I said to the last question. I think that one team had a feasible way to switch and the other team did not. I think one team had a defensive foundation that they could rely on, and the other team didn't necessarily have that either. And one team was valuing possessions a little bit more. But I would continue to say, I think that there were a couple coaching mistakes. I'm not going to ignore that. I think that they should have advanced the ball in the one situation. That being said, that would be a lot of rungs down the list of the reasons why they lost these games, in my personal opinion. I don't even know how much would necessarily point to experience, although I do agree with your point that how often as a rookie, if you're Ben Shepherd, do you get to start in an Eastern Conference Finals? Andrew Nembhard getting that experience. You never want Tyrese Halliburton to be out, but by virtue of the fact that he was out, some of these guys got very valuable experience that they can grow from that they're not going to see in a regular season game for sure.
I'm going to posit a question that neither of us will have the answer to, but if there's anybody who listens to this who likes to go do like scrape a bunch of data, I'd be really interested to see how experience or amount of games played while still being considered in a player's prime factors into playoff statistics. You know, like Tyrese Maxey, by the time he's like 28, if he's played a whole bunch of basketball games in the playoffs, do you start to see like that's more favorable than like say Buddy Hield playing his first playoff game, something like that? It's not exactly one-to-one, but I'm sure the listener and you understand what I mean. Is there positive correlation between better performances and past history in the playoffs?
The only thing that I was going to add on to that as far as experience goes is Pascal is a champion, and Pascal even had key turnovers at the end of that game. There were 2 times at the end of game 4 where he, had miscues as well. I don't think those were necessarily both on him. Some of the time it was with defenders coming way off and not making quick enough decisions. But I just think, there's stuff to clean up for sure. The Pacers never fully recovered from what happened at the end of game 1. I don't really think so. I would just summarize it and say that I think that the coaching mistakes were pretty far down the list of why I would peg what those games ended up being.
Yeah. You can never point to one play and say like, oh, if this guy had X or Y experience, that would be different. That's why I wanted like the macro. If anybody is going to dive into the stats, I would be interested to see, because the game is won over the course of 48 minutes. And if Pascal scores like 31 instead of 24, maybe that changes the outcome of a game. And, that's kind of what I meant to say. But yes,
right.
Agreed.
Next question, Adam Bauer. What were some of the things that the Pacers did during the regular season that carried over into the playoffs, good or bad? And also, what areas did the playoffs expose as areas needing to improve?
So, having seen less of the regular season Pacers, there's something that sticks immediately. There was an emerging trend towards the end of the regular season, the whole TJ McConnell thing. And then it maintained into the playoffs. He changed my tune, as you well know, Caitlin. I was like a TJ kind of, yeah, I get it. I totally get it kind of guy. I very rudely said that he played as if a witch had cast a spell on him, that he wasn't allowed to take threes. And then he started playing unbelievable basketball. And despite, I brought up the 52% true shooting thing. I thought he was sublime during the playoffs. I think he deserves like flowers, accolades. And that was something that really maintained from the end of the regular season into the postseason. As far as like things that they need to change, there is like a thing, Andrew Wiggins, Jason Tatum. You see these guys, and I picked one guy who's not a star and one guy who is. See in the playoffs, those rebounding numbers, they go way up. There is some stuff about having a big wing. I'm not sure if Pascal's rebounding numbers went up in the playoffs, but there were some games where it certainly got big. You can see big wings bring a little bit extra to the glass in these types of environments, and it helps immensely.
Paul George was similar.
Paul George being similar, sure. LeBron is similar. Like really big, good wings do that. And so is there an answer on the roster for the rebounding woes? Maybe Jarris way down the line, who knows? But that was something that I thought the Pacers weren't able to contend with. I thought maybe Pascal, on some games, you could see he really helped that. But Pascal and Miles as a whole, it's not really tenable, especially to be, and it showed up. We saw it show up in quite a few different games. That those corner crashes, maybe a guy who's getting a lot of flack, like Karl Anthony Towns, for example, for some of his shot making, he's a guy who helps mitigate some of those corner crashes because he's so good on the glass. Like little things like that. Can the Pacers punch up at it? Yes. Do I think that they have the requisite guys to punch up at it to the degree that it's no longer a problem? No. That stayed. They scored in way more unique ways in the half court. Obviously, TJ, Nembhard, and Pascal were largely the keys to being able to do that in the postseason. And then you saw the regular, I think, Obi Toppin, Tyrese Haliburton, Miles Turner, the regular quirks and rhythms of how the Pacers like to score showed up as well. I think that they showed a diversity of process, a diversity of success that I wouldn't have guessed. And like they also succeeded a lot more in these playoffs than I would have guessed. Some of that is quality of competition, injuries, they play out. Tyrese didn't get to play the last 2 games. Like it happens. We've seen it a lot in these playoffs, but they found some successes for sure. Like I said, they should be really proud of themselves. But there's some things that stick around that are like tough.
Some follow-ups to what you said. I think that Bennedict Mathurin is somebody who can punch up as a rebounder. He has moments during the regular season where he looks like he's been embodied by the spirit of Lance Stevenson, which Lance Stevenson was a very good wing rebounder. Ben can do that in certain games and in certain situations. So that's one person who might help them. As far as Jarris, I think I've told you this before. A lot of what he does defensively and offensively, he has very sly, deft hands, and that accentuates what he does as a player in a lot of ways. But also, he doesn't always have his hands ready for defensive rebounds. Like a lot of times they'll be down by his side, then he'll poke them up, and it's like the ball is just flipping off his hands. This is something that I wrote about ahead of the season, and it played out throughout the year. And they wanted him to focus more on rebounding.
I have a thing to say. So I've started doing a lot of bouldering, a lot of rock climbing. And so I did my first V5 yesterday, and I looked it up. It usually takes 2.5 years. I did it in a month and a half. I'm really proud of myself. But there was a dynamic movement in the middle. I had to jump and catch myself. And I can't remember the exact term, but in bouldering or rock climbing, your contact reaction to grab things as soon as you touch them is really important. And some guys, when they rebound, have that, and some guys don't. That's pretty good, right?
That was a very good anecdote there. I really appreciated that. And then as far as like what you said about TJ, I'm guessing we'll probably get into this with some of the other questions, but I have a follow-up question for you. If Bennedict was playing off the bench with TJ, how do you think that would have impacted what TJ was doing in the playoffs? And then also, based on what we've seen from Andrew Nembhard in these 2 games, running an offense without Tyrese Haliburton, how does TJ fit into that?
So we talked about this, about navigating TJ stuff. Bennedict would not be the man I trust to do that. I think that there's some diminishing returns there from what guys are good at. And I guess the question probably becomes down the line what Mathurin brings on defense, what he brings as far as like that plus rebounding stuff. And when I just look at this roster, and many of the listeners will know, Nembhard is non-negotiable for me. I think he's like unbelievable. Tyrese is obviously non-negotiable. Pascal is going to be there. I'm not coming from Toronto with sources to say, oh yeah, Pascal's locked in or anything. But that wing situation, I think Neesmith fits a lot better with what TJ likes to do than.
Let me pause and say that TJ and Ben play really well together, actually.
There we go.
Like TJ activates Ben as a 45 cutter. TJ looks for Ben in transition in ways, and also because Ben plays off the bench, which we'll get into this a little bit more, he can play out of sets more often. Kind of what I was getting at with that question is if more of the offense tilts to Ben, I don't know that you're getting this same version of TJ, if that makes sense, because TJ had to take on more of a scoring load because Buddy and Ben were no longer on this roster. And then my other question was in relation to if Tyrese and Andrew are both excelling at playing point, how much are you going to want to stagger them and make split decisions and give Andrew that space to get to do what we just saw him do? And then are you back at the situation you were at the beginning of the year where the first game of the season, TJ is getting told like, hey, we're sorry, you're not going to be in the rotation. And as it turned out, by the next game, he was back in the rotation. Eventually, TJ had kind of overtaken Andrew for a bit around the time of the in-season tournament. And then because they had traded Bruce Brown, the opportunity opened up. Buddy's gone. Andrew's a starter again. TJ could run wild with the bench. Does that continue next year based on what version you've seen of Andrew and what I've just explained to you of Benedict Mathurin? Does that make sense?
Yes. Okay. So egg on my face, first of all. Secondly,
I didn't phrase the question very well.
No, that's okay. Also, I just have not seen as much of these guys. Well, especially like if we're talking about how Mathurin fits with TJ. Interesting. The roster building permutations as far as like how you split up usage and touches.
And also Ben Shepherd factors here as well. So
yeah. There's like ceiling stuff here and then floor stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of with, it's the Pacers are very good at maximizing guys who don't necessarily need the ball. And they have been. And we saw how long it took and still the clunkiness of like the stuff, the easy offense isn't available. They have to start looking for the tough offense. Why aren't you finding Pascal Siakam more often? Like, I wonder how much they'll break, and I wonder how much they'll introduce new looks for guys rather than just having guys step into the system and run it. That's maybe I really couldn't say how the usage is going to bear out. And I'm not much for predictions anyway, but I trust Rick to like run a very good offense. And so rather than competing conceptions about usage, maybe I'm just excited to see what positions these guys are put in as they all share the floor. That might be a tad bit too optimistic. I'm not sure. And it's not answering the question very well. But that's my...
I think it's possible that depending upon what steps Ben takes over the summer, that you would see TJ somewhat willfully stepping back as a scorer and going back to being a facilitator, and that chemistry continuing to work with Benedict Mathurin. But I do think the question of how you're going to balance what Andrew just did and allowing him the space to do that while TJ is still on this roster is going to be an interesting one for them to navigate.
Can I say something as well?
Mm-hmm.
Andrew Nembhard has arrived, and you know how he's arrived? Because I've already started to see trade Tyrese takes. That's how you know
there was somebody
you have
who
a real
replied to me
backcourt.
and was like, they should keep Andrew and move Tyrese. And I about fell off the place where I was sitting when I read that reply.
That's how you know you've got the talent. That's how you know you're in a good spot when people start saying, well, this other guy's so good. We just trade this all NBA guard. Yes. You're in the middle of it right now.
I guess to answer Adam Bauer from my side of things, I was going to point out and say that the transition frequency and what the Pacers do with pace carried over to the playoffs in a way that I think a lot of times there's a cliche that, pace slows down in the playoffs. The Pacers were still able to maintain it, and that's very meaningful for what the identity of this team is, especially shaped around Tyrese Halliburton, who is still the franchise star of this team. And then as far as like what didn't or what did get exposed, a lot of the things and the issues that were there on defense carried out throughout the entirety. Was there improvement after the Pascal trade? Yes, there was, in part because Nembhard and Nesmith were starting again. I think it is somewhat of an indictment that Andrew Nembhard and Aaron Nesmith were the two people guarding Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum in Game 4 of an elimination game. I think that says quite a bit, and I think that should stick with the Pacers a little bit, and that's not me trying to, throw dirt on Pascal Siakam. I just think that Pascal answers a lot of needs that they have, and he should 100% be their top priority this summer. I'm not questioning that at all. He doesn't address all of the defensive issues that they have, and I don't necessarily think that there's a person on this roster in the immediate who does. You're hoping that Jarris can be a contributor on that end, especially in some of these types of matchups. I don't think he's there right now. I'll have to see more from Summer League and more at the beginning of next season. I think they still need a wing-size wing defender, and I think that showed up in this round. I think it showed up in the round against the Knicks, particularly when they were guarding Jalen Brunson. So that was a season-long trend, and it continues.
I did caution when Pascal got traded there. The same way you cautioned me about Bruce Brown is like reputations sometimes precede. And I was like, Pascal's defense, I hope it gets back to a certain place. It didn't. And it was in a worse place than most people thought. And Bruce Brown for the Raptors is tough, man. Pascal had a successful half season and playoffs with the Pacers for sure. Oof, Bruce. I hope whether it's with the Raptors going forward.
And, some of what we saw as being the defensive concerns in Game 4 with how much switching they were doing is in part why I think they weren't putting Pascal on to Jason Tatum outright, because it forces Miles Turner to have to switch. And like I had pointed out on prior pods, when they did that type of coverage, the 4-5 switching against Paolo Banchero and Franz Wagner against Orlando worked very well, because if you push them out to the perimeter and you're isolated against Miles, great. It had issues even with Aaron and Andrew doing it in this game. So I think that they still have holes to address.
Quick question.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lottery pick who has okay size on the wing. There's two of them, actually. Benedict Mathurin, Jarris Walker. How do you feel? A lot of people, if they were saying what you said, would be like, oh, look, we have two lottery picks.
There's further questions about Jarris coming where I'm going to address some of this.
Okay.
I think that Jarris can be part of the solution. I just don't think if you're hoping, which I will point out and say, since you didn't see the exit interviews, the Pacers, I felt, weren't having an Atlanta Hawks reaction to their making it to the Eastern Conference Finals in these exit interviews. They seemed like they understood. Pascal had said, like, this was encouraging. There's still work to be done. Chad Buchanan had said, things in the NBA aren't linear. Just because we made it to the Eastern Conference Finals this year doesn't guarantee we'll be back next year or that we'll make it to the finals. We know that we still need to improve and that there's things that we need to work on. Pretty much everybody had that reaction. So, but Tyrese also countered and was like, I want this to be the standard here, and we need to put the work into it, that we want to get back here. If that's your goal and you want to advance in the postseason, I'll just need to see more from Jarris this summer to indicate that that's readiness. And that's not me being down on him. He's 20 years old. I like a lot of his physical tools on both ends of the floor. I like his offensive instincts for sure. Things that he does are very casually dominant that I very much like. I don't know. I honestly don't know is what my answer to that question is.
Those are intelligent answers. I agree with those answers. This is kind of what, Raptors fans had been debating a fair amount. Are we in a position to pay Pascal Siakam? And the Raptors obviously were not. I mean, that was like when Pascal got traded, Masai Ujiri came into the press and he was like, after it had been reported that he just wasn't talking to Pascal, like left Pascal on red for months. And he was like, yeah, maybe I didn't do a good job of that. Pascal and the Raptors are far away. But the Raptors going forward, they were in a position when they trade Pascal, they had Emmanuel Quickley, who is about to get paid, RJ Barrett, who is paid, Scotty Barnes, who will be getting a max extension, of course. And as far as young talent, they have Scotty and Grady Dick. No one else. So if they lock themselves into Pascal's max contract, that would be difficult. The Pacers have Jarris Walker. They have Mathurin. They have Nembhard. They have Halliburton. Turner on a descending contract, or it's because he had that big jump and it goes back down. There's just room for, and you can't bet on it, but there's room for internal growth in a way that wasn't present. These guys, if you want to select the guy at 6th overall, 7th overall, those guys have to be good. Those guys have to be like potential all-stars. And it might not shake out that way, but it can. I'm very interested to see how it works for Indiana going forward. And I do like what Chad said. I like what Pascal said. And regarding what Tyrese said, he's got to be Game 7 Tyrese every game of the playoffs if he wants to guarantee those things. Yeah.
Next question. Elia Meeks Johnson, what are your top positive and negative takeaways from this playoff run?
I kind of did that earlier. I always do this. I disregard your templates. I'm incorrigible.
Do you want me to go first then, since you did kind of say yours? So my positives would, of course, be what we just saw from Andrew Nembhard in games 3 and 4. You wrote a piece about a star being born the morning before. I had written a piece about him finding the inside track with his inside hand push dribble and kind of the hand-to-hand combat that had been going on with little nuances in his game against Drew Holiday and things that we hadn't seen at the beginning of the year when he was running point against the Celtics, similar to what we did on the podcast. So the Tyrese Siakam 2-man game, I'm going to hold on to that possession of them against the New York Knicks for a long time that we also showed on the podcast, where Deuce McBride was top locking Tyrese. They were running that 2-man action. Pascal pops to the elbow. It's going to be a pop and get, but because he's being top locked, Tyrese screened his own man, tried to sandwich him there, and Pascal rejected that and went to the rim. That's what we talked about. It's 2-man game problem solving. We saw some of that with Nembhard and Siakam as well. It's important. The Pacers are an egalitarian team. For much of the season, they were filtering the ball to the weak side. That's all well and good, but I do think that they found out in the playoffs, at a certain point in time, you need the ball to be in the hands of your 2 best players and have them figure it out. And they needed to find more inverted actions for Pascal, and they started doing that with those 2 players. So that one in particular is going to be there, maintaining the pace. Ben Shepherd actually getting playing time and experience, I think, was very important. And then from a coaching staff level, and the defense still isn't where they need it to be, but the fact that they weren't dogmatic with their defensive coverages, I think mattered to me quite a bit, because they could have stuck with what the scheme was at the beginning of the year, and they likely would not have beat the New York Knicks, if we're being honest. Even in the reduced state, if they wouldn't have been like, you know what, we're going to start being very aggressive, helping off the ball side corner. We're going to leave Precious Achiuwa and Josh Hart on the perimeter. Those aren't things that they were doing at the beginning of the year. They made little adjustments like that to the defensive scheme throughout the playoffs, and I give them credit for that. And I think that that's something positive to take away as they continue to hopefully upgrade their overall defensive personnel.
I have a new one, actually. It parallels to what I've been talking about when I've been cautioning Raptors fans towards being really upset with Darko. What the Pacers did, and you could look at the Pacers roster, poll a bunch of people, and if you'd never seen the stats about offensive rating, where would their lineup of players be ranked as far as like the best collection of offensive players in the NBA? I struggle to believe that they would be polled inside the top 10. And yet, they scored in a diverse manner. They scored in the most efficient manner. That is players, yes. That's coaching. And also, you're working with some reputations on defense that aren't quite accurate. The Pacers, I don't think Carlisle is like coaching like the best defense, and he's figured it out. You know, he makes all the right decisions. I don't think that's the case. But the Pacers struggle on defense, where if you look at the roster, I think it makes sense that they struggle, and they exceed expectations on offense relative to what's there. So I know a lot of people got upset at Rick over the course, and mistakes were made. As we've covered, there are some things that objectively it would have been like, would have liked to see that quicker, sooner, and maybe you win some more possessions over the course of playoffs. That's good. That's great. But I come away being like, yeah, nice.
This is a point that I made many times at the beginning of the year, where if you're going to put blame on the coaching staff for why at one point in time they had the worst defense in the NBA and the top offense, then you also have to give credit to why they have the historically great offense that they have. But continue on.
Yeah, and it's basically just that is what is a coach working with? And coaches rarely put players under the bus. I covered one of the coaches who did that quite often, Nick Nurse, and he ran his course faster maybe than other coaches would have, given what was happening. But coaches look at things like, it's not about complaining about what you don't have. It's about like creating as many wins with what you do. Rick's job, he's not the roster builder, you know? They did pretty well given the roster. They did a lot of different things. They went to work.
Sorry.
That's basically it. And then just kind of what you said about, you know, the screen your own action. I think that there's lots of stuff, even actually just to focus on Pascal, watching how he scores now, because anybody who's watched Pascal over a large portion of time, and perhaps somebody who watched Chris Middleton play great basketball in round one and in the past, as Chris Middleton went from being like a really sneaky athletic wing defender with the Bucks and, you know, his tail end of the Detroit start that he had, his body has changed and he's less athletic, and there's a lot of usefulness there. Pascal, you can see scores without athleticism now. He's built his game to that point. Very impressive. And I think for any Pacers fan who's perhaps feeling a little bit anxious about what a max looks like going into the future, that's pretty good. You know that like he doesn't really rely on athleticism necessarily to work to spots and to score tough buckets. That's something that should stay and could conceivably get better over time, as other things may leave him.
So you're telling me that the person who replied to the other podcast I did this morning and said that Pascal needs to work on his post moves and his ball handling, and that's a big reason why they got eliminated from the playoffs, wasn't accurate with what they said?
So just outside of the Pascal post-up being, I think, second spectrum's highest efficiency play in all of the playoffs, which is notable to me, I think that the defense is where you would have been like, oh, I wish Pascal gave a little bit more. You wish he shot better than, I think, 0.298% from three. And it was nice that he sorted out the free throw stuff, but it was ghastly to watch it as it went away. I think he finished, like, outside of that little spurt where everything went wrong, I think he finished the postseason shooting, like 82% from that point on from the free throw line. But things went wrong. But what went right, I think, was the ball handling and post-ups.
I think that my negative takeaways from this playoff run would be how many times Samson had to use the word gumption and how many times he was accurate when he was questioning the gumption. I think that, how many times they continued getting beat by intermediary actions, the times when they were playing two different types of defensive coverages at the same time, some of the strong initial thrusts that they would have and then relaxing, some of what we saw in the transition in game 3 against Boston. Just looking at game 2 in New York, game 5 in New York, aspects of game 2 in Boston, the game 5 versus Milwaukee, the rebounding, how much they were having to push for, effort. And I will say that the Pacers play a very exhausting style of basketball. Obviously, they're aiming to play very fast in the open floor. And also they were applying full court pressure more than any other team in the playoffs and doing so with their bigs, which was somewhat questionable to me at times. But these are tiring things to do. I don't know how much that was impacting some of what was going on, but this has been going on for quite some time. I wrote an article about it after they played the Spurs, where a lot of the questioning was around Tyrese and what was going on with him offensively. And I'm like, I think there's very clear reasons for why this is going on offensively. My bigger concern is why they're having to repeatedly call timeouts because they gave up 3 offensive rebounds on the same possession and 4 drives on the same possession, leading to shots in the paint, or those types of things. You saw it firsthand against the Toronto Raptors, giving up 33 points off cuts. That's the most any team gave up in a game off of cuts the whole season. Those types of things, that can't continue on, and it was a little bit disappointing that it was something that we were talking about as frequently as we were talking about it throughout this run. So that would be my one, big negative takeaway, I guess.
Yeah, and I think it does help. Some fans I know do this, and I've seen people from, we saw a lot of it actually. And I think we speak kindly about players, which invites other fans, like Celtics fans could listen to our podcast and be like, oh, nice. Bucks fans, Knicks fans. But what a lot of fans will do is they'll go look at what fans are saying about their own team. And oftentimes fans complain about things that are good and they overblow things that are bad because familiarity breeds contempt. In some cases, I don't think that's necessarily a golden rule or anything. So if you ever want to feel better about your team, go watch the Celtics fans melt down despite how good their team is, or the Mavericks or the Minnesota Timberwolves or Denver, perspective, etc.
Did you have any big negative takeaways, or are you good and in lockstep with what mine was?
Negative takeaways? We didn't get picked up by ESPN. I thought maybe basketball.
That was a little bit of a letdown.
I thought maybe basketball she wrote would get scooped up. Yeah, that's it.
Michael Prather, how did the Pacers balance the need to add size and defense while not messing up the chemistry and lethal offense that got them here? Is Jarris Walker at the 4 and answer with Siakam at the 3?
I think no. I would feel this is what I talk about with Emmanuel Quickley and Scotty Barnes, because everybody said just they looked at the skill sets of those two players and they said, well, they'll fit together great. In fact, the Raptors have a documentary crew called Open Gym that captured the phone call that Masai Ujiri was on where he said he loves the fit with Scotty. And then they didn't fit well together at all. And it's because Scotty would not lower himself to being like Emmanuel Quickly's Isaiah Hartenstein. And why should he? Scotty is like a very good all-star level wing who scores better than Emmanuel and creates more than Emmanuel with less. And Emmanuel was not good enough at playing off of Scotty. And it would be Scotty's job to be like a wheel greaser on offense to maximize Emmanuel, which is why it's so important that Pirtle is there. Pascal is the player he is, really. Jarris, we see this happen with players. Your development can be affected, and what you try to accomplish as a player and how you grow can be dependent on team context. I think it's easier for Jarris to become a 3 than it is for Pascal to become a 3, because Pascal had been in Toronto for some time trying to become a 3. God, he tried his damnedest. He did. And I've watched Pascal be like an unbelievably elite athlete. I've watched him as still when John Wall was healthy, a primary on him in playoff series. I watched him guard as the primary, like MVP Russell Westbrook. I've watched him unbelievable championship winner level defense. That stuff isn't around anymore. And Pascal, again, just thrived as a post-up player. If somebody's going to make that 3-4 situation work, it's not going to be Pascal at the 3. It would be cool, but that's just not happening, I don't think.
I think if they are able to re-sign Pascal and they want to also re-sign and keep Obi Toppin, then Jarris Walker's cleanest path to getting on the floor is him having to shoehorn himself into being a 3. That becomes more feasible because his 3-point shot was falling at a really reliable clip, at least at the G League level. Shot above 40% on catch and shoot threes. Shot above 40% on guarded catch and shoot threes. I would caution people and let them know that not a lot of those were coming off of motion. Most of them were standstill threes. There were a few times where he might get one like standing behind, like a complex DHO action. Once or twice where I saw him cut middle off of a pin down and shoot one. But like him as a ghost screener, him out of the pick and pop, not quite as much. But I will say that like it's interesting looking at both rookies because they both kind of were mirror images of each other, and that Ben was drafted as a shooter and impressed more with his defense, and Jarris was drafted as a defender and impressed because he made shooting progress, especially because when he first came over, especially during summer league and preseason, and with Houston, when he was shooting the 3, it looked like he was getting hit by a gentle gust of wind. He was drifting to his left on the release a lot, and that's why a lot of his shots were coming up short. They've corrected some of that, and that's helped with why his accuracy has improved. So that will help him play the 3, and I think he can do some wing initiation. We talked about that, like a little hostage dribble and him being able to use like the offhand fake push shot into a lob. There's that type of stuff. I just think that that's where he's probably going to have to play if the roster stays as it is. But again, like I want to say everything with Jarris right now, we simply have not seen enough to have a concrete answer. I'm not going to oversell it, and I don't want to undersell it either because it might work out really well. I don't know.
Can I suggest something?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it might be best if like Isaiah Jackson, Pascal Siakam, Jarris Walker, Obi Toppin, if the Pacers pursued some sort of shrink the floor defensively, get big on offense type of approach, they could call it like Vision 6-9 or something like that.
This one folds right into this, so we'll just continue the Jarris conversation a little bit. As for a question, presuming Siakam is back, this comes from Bob Cook. The one big contributor who seems most likely not to return for contract reasons would be Obi, so it would seem initially for Jarris to slot into his minutes. What would you say are the biggest on-court impacts to such a change? So if Jarris is playing in the role that Obi was playing in the playoffs.
Honestly, I'm not a talking head. I haven't seen enough of Jarris probably or Obi during the regular season for me to like start this off. If you say something and it conjures up in my mind, but you know, Jarris played how many minutes during the playoffs? I didn't get to see much of him.
So I think that this would be the grand vision of what the trade-off would be. Against the Los Angeles Clippers after halftime, they actually played Jarris a substantial amount of minutes as the starter opposite of Paul George due to some people who are being out. And like I said, he has very quick slide deft hands. He actually pokes the ball away from Paul George there. He had some strong defensive possessions in this game. And a lot of the things that he did, the touch passes, the reads that he was showing, it was everything that fans and the Pacers got excited about when they drafted him. That was something to hang on to. That being said, there were other games where the slide deft hands thing and the reaching is like, hey, you reach, I teach. And then he's getting beat by Kevin Durant. And then like also when he's playing Kevin Durant off the ball in this game, it's like, you probably don't want to help off of him at the nail when that's Kevin Durant and giving him a wide open three. So when you're thinking about how he would fit into this in particular, it's like, okay, well, those are some of the same mistakes that Obi made in some of these games, right? Like you probably don't want to come off of Jason Tatum to go double the post at that angle and then force Miles Turner to have to be in rotation late. So that's the cleaner thing. And then also like when we're looking at guarding the bigger wings, like everything that we were talking about, Jason Tatum and Al Horford in the pick and pop and what the progressions of that was. Here's Jarris guarding DeMar DeRozan for a time against the Chicago Bulls. They're doing a veer switch. Whenever he gets over there to Vucevic, at least there's a little bit more size to guard the post when he does make that veer switch versus some of the possessions that I showed you against Boston where, if you're doing that with a guard and then now it's TJ on Al Horford following the veer switch, and now that's turning into a hook shot. Just having more size in some of those situations would certainly make a difference. You're hoping that Jarris can play across more positions, but again, I would caution and say some of his screen navigation isn't where you want it. That's giving up a pretty clear rejection, then getting dislodged against DeMar at the rim. Another one here's against Kyle Anderson where he's just parallel, easy shoulder to hip advantage all the way to the basket. This is why I said, like, there's things to really like about Jarris, and I think that he has good physical tools overall as a defender. But I do think that something that stands out when you're watching a lot of this is a lot of his defense is more based on his hands than it is necessarily his mobility and his foot speed. And then also just making the correct reads within the scheme is something that he still needs to grow in as well. So I think the series against Boston, especially in Game 4, was tough for both Miles Turner and Obi Toppin. We've talked about some of Obi's physical limitations that make it more difficult to switch. Those same physical limitations aren't present for Jarris, so you think he would have a higher ceiling if you're wanting to play a more switchable lineup that eventually he could plug into that. Or maybe, a couple years down the road, like what was going on with Jalen Brunson, it's like, hey, we need somebody with more length. Jarris has a 7-foot wingspan, so when he does give up separation, he can reach out and still contest the shot, which isn't something that Andrew Nembhard could do in that same situation. So that's kind of the give and take between Jarris and Obi.
So and to that point as well, some of the easy flow stuff that we saw Obi, like he's able to score some ways that Jarris just never will be able to, I don't think. As far as just like playing up the court, Obi is pretty unique in that way.
One of them is a rim runner and the other person would be better in transition with the ball in their hands. Things that it's kind of like, again, they're not similar players, but the momentum and the reads that you see Scotty make in the open floor, Jarris is capable of doing with the ball in his hands in the open floor. But it is a question of how often will he be doing that in a Rick Carlisle offense on a team that has Andrew Nembhard, Tyrese Halliburton, and TJ McConnell.
So I was also about to not make a Scotty comparison, but there are some things that I see Scotty do that I can easily see Jarris do. And it's something that they did with Pascal and Scotty together. And this isn't necessarily the Pacers' flow offense, but it's kind of if they're back in the playoffs and Jarris is figuring into things, problem solving is if they're going to generate switches at the point of attack, you can use a switch as a seal opportunity. And I think Jarris, we talked about earlier, there's some really inspired reads that have been made on the short roll. And you can actually turn that switch opportunity, the switch and seal, into a similar type of action. It's not exactly the same, but you get to make a really good downhill decision maker with height, with length, and with touch going downhill with his man on his back and perhaps with advantage, if not with advantage, against a moving defense. There's lots of those like big things that they might be able to do if we're specifically talking about, Pascal and Jarris. And then obviously there's a million other things that we have to see. Jarris he'll develop his game and then things become possible, and things that maybe people thought would be possible won't develop, and then that won't show up. So
I think, I mean, a lot of my answers about Jarris are going to be boring because it's honestly, I need to see more of him.
Mm-hmm.
And to a certain extent, like I get it. We've talked about it on prior episodes. The thing with Doug McDermott and Jarris, I understand why they were looking at using a movement shooter. But there are spots in these playoff series where if Jarris had more readiness, you can more easily envision, hey, that's where Jarris could help you out in ways that Doug and perhaps even not Obi Toppin are going to be able to fill those types of roles where you're hopeful that Jarris will be able to at some point. I think I'll leave the Jarris conversation there. James T. Sandberg feels like the most obvious question is what to do with Nembhard. If he is capable of being a star without Halliburton, does this mean he needs to go somewhere else, a la Brunson, or is there a way the Pacers can maximize his skill with Tyrese on the court?
I think that Nembhard should go to the Raptors for very little in a trade.
Would you consider 3 late first-round picks?
Oh my God. Well, unfortunately they've already traded one of those for Kelly Olynyk and Ochai Agbaji. I wrote about this, and Nembhard came out of school later than a lot of players do. That's probably why, given his profile, he ended up going in the second round, albeit very early in the second round. I've really liked Nembhard for a long time. While this playoff run exceeded what I thought might happen, none of the things that he showed exceeded what I thought he was capable of. We just saw it a little bit more regularly, which is great, and against really good competition, which is fantastic. He also is a guy who, it's not always about, from the Pacers' point of view, it's not about getting Nembhard the biggest numbers. And that's where that'll be Nembhard and the Pacers. That's down the line, though. Big numbers versus impact and being on a better team. The Pacers don't have to do anything. They have like a guard who fits in so many places, who can guard up, who can guard ones, who has been hitting the 3, and I suspect that will be a part of his game going forward, despite being up and down during regular seasons. He can initiate offense. There's nothing bad happening here. You don't have to create Brunson. And the Brunson thing got kicked down the road, and the Mavericks still could have paid him. They didn't. So the Pacers, they don't have to do anything. I suspect they should be mindful of it and keep giving Nembhard opportunities, and they can shuffle lineups depending on that too. Maybe with how guys develop, maybe Jarris becomes a really good partner in 2-man actions for Nembhard. Maybe they build out different things like that. But Nembhard, at some point, will probably, he and his team will approach the Pacers and say, like, it's money-making time. I'd like, players do that. Agents do that. It's money-making time. I want some of the ball. I want big numbers. But if the Pacers are a team that doesn't really sign free agents like that, and they have Nembhard there, and there's an opportunity where they say, man, you're going to get paid. We'll extend you. And then you just have like a really good player who fits a lot of different places. I think that's more so where they have to thread the needle rather than like, just give him everything right now. If that makes sense. It's a little bit long-winded.
No, I mean, I think the Jalen Brunson comparison is, I don't think that the Mavs had to let Jalen Brunson go somewhere else necessarily.
I couldn't believe they did.
Even become Brunson. I would let Mavs fans weigh in and people who cover the Mavs, but they just didn't pay Jalen Brunson.
Ooh, and a quick thing, I've looked this up before. Jalen, the last playoffs that he played with the Mavericks, he averaged like 23 points per game next to Luka. So
yeah. I mean, and Luka and Kyrie would tell you that Brunson and Luka could have played together as well. I mean, we're watching that play out. I think the more interesting comparison might be De'Aaron Fox and Tyrese Halliburton, not because of skill sets, but because they did end up blossoming separately and what the reasons for that was. And part, I think some of it got caught up too much offensively when the real reason was more on the defensive end of the floor. They were getting outscored by 5.4 points per 100, but that was mostly because they were giving up 118.3. Yep. That Kings roster was also very unwieldy. That being said, Tyrese was the person who was getting marginalized by it. His usage rate was swinging from like 20% without Fox to like 16% with Fox. So he was kind of the person more making the sacrifices in those settings. And then he comes to Indiana. He can show what he can do. The difference being there is Nembhard gives you more defensively. It's kind of like when you look at Donovan Mitchell and Darius Garland as being a small backcourt. Andrew doesn't have as much size for position as some people at the 2 guard, but he's capable of playing up. And more importantly, for somebody playing next to Tyrese, he can guard at the point of attack so that Tyrese doesn't have to. Those same problems aren't necessarily there. And I would say with Nembhard, like his picks certainly weren't as high with Tyrese as without him, but Tyrese showed growth as a movement shooter. And the way he was guarded in these playoffs and what Nembhard did in games 3 and 4 actually just makes me more bullish about the two of them playing together, because it means that they have more of a solution for when Tyrese is seeing this amount of pressure, when he's being face guarded, when you need to play 4-on-4, that you can tilt more of the offense to Nembhard. And this is why I brought up the TJ question, because at a certain point in time, if Nembhard does want more of the ball, maybe the means for doing that is by staggering Tyrese and Andrew heavily. Because a year ago, I wrote a piece about there was a very specific move that Tyrese Haliburton uses to get past the switch. You and I have talked about it before, where he fakes the step back to the right, draws the defender to him, gets off the ball, and beats it with movement rather than his handle. Andrew Nembhard started doing that in a couple games. And I was like, this is the benefit, that even when Tyrese isn't on the court, you can pick up things from his game. And at the end of it, I wrote, and I quote, "Now in showing growth while taking aspects from Haliburton's game, the question for the future should be whether his current limitations," meaning Nembhard, "as a scorer can warrant siphoning some pick-and-roll possessions from Haliburton's artistry, not only for the sake of lessening the star guard's burden, but also for the purpose of fully exploring the outskirts of his own," meaning Nembhard. We're a year later, and I think that his scoring as a guard warrants siphoning some of it, not because Tyrese was the best pick and roll creator in the NBA this year, but because it could lessen both of their burdens, I think, in a very complementary way.
And even on top of that, like you mentioned the defense with Fox and Haliburton, that's exactly what it was. The Pacers were 4.4 possessions better, like a really high level difference in how good the defense was with Nembhard on the floor as opposed to off of it. What you get with Nembhard, like he fits really well next to Tyrese. And I understand, like, if Nembhard, his offense just grows exponentially, then Nembhard could be in a position where he's like, nope, I really need more. And Tyrese has too much and it doesn't fit. But, like, the cart is ahead of the horse right now as far as that goes.
Correct.
And defensively, if you want, like, Tyrese, in my mind, is going to be somebody who has to be protected by a 2 or a 3 on defense for his whole career, basically. If you're not signing Dillon Brooks, Nembhard is very, very strong there. Like, there's not a lot of 2s who come in and do what Nembhard will do. And that's the fact of it. And I think Nembhard will do it for a long time. And Dillon Brooks also won't give you offensively the diversity that Nembhard will. For example, Dillon Brooks is just it can be a facsimile of Dillon Brooks, but you understand my meaning there.
I mean, we saw very segmented looks at all of this, right? What the options are next to Tyrese. We saw Benedict Mathurin for the first 10 games of the season. We saw why they went away from that. We saw Buddy Hield, and Tyrese and Buddy, they outscored opponents. Ideas that the two of them playing was a net negative weren't completely accurate, but I can watch what happened in the playoffs and be like, yeah, Tyrese probably wouldn't have seen as much attention at the nail if Buddy was there, and certainly against some of the switches, Buddy would have been useful. But he's not going to initiate offense if Tyrese is getting some of the coverage that he was getting against Deuce McBride, Patrick Beverley, when they needed Andrew to do what Andrew did. And to your point, the fact that Andrew shot over 40% on catch and shoot threes, if that continues, he might start having people playing a little bit closer to him as well than what we saw. So I think I agree with you. I don't think that we need to look that far into the future yet. I think if anything else, we should just be encouraged and think that both of them showed growth in specific areas where I think they can be even more complementary.
Don't ruin the time you're having as your second round pick guard in his second season became somewhat of a darling in the Eastern Conference Finals, despite the team not finding success. Don't ruin it. Like, enjoy the moment.
Right, because the difference here being is that when Sabonis started to blossom after they had acquired Sabonis and Victor, you could tell that eventually sometime down the road, they're going to have to make a choice or trade one of Miles or Sabonis eventually, because there was reasons to think they weren't going to be complementary and that both of them needed to be 5s. It felt very purgatorial, like, for the love of everything, please just make a choice. In this case, there's enough reasons to think that these two could play very well together that I agree. Like, Just enjoy it while it's here.
And that's Nembhard, baby. Like Nembhard, some players are just so easy. Some players are just so easy. You just pop them in. And like being easy isn't the best thing you can be as a player. A star is the best thing you can be as a player. And Nembhard isn't a star. He could potentially become one, sure. But being easy is like the second best next thing.
And I think if he was talking, I think he would be honest and say that like his more natural position is point guard. It was an adjustment for him to be making reads in secondary situations. But even in that, like he has a very physical last step. There was times where he was like using a Smitty coming out of the corner to shake people. He was using some pass manipulation by the end of the season that, like I said, I think that there's enough reasons to think that it can be complementary.
Yeah.
This comes from Matt. I choose relentless optimism with the season for the Pacers. Thanks for putting out such great content. How reactive should the Pacers, or I suppose any NBA team, after such a lengthy playoff run? You tweeted that it was telling them, saying me, Samson, I don't think tweeted this, that Miles wasn't playing late in the fourth, for example. Do they see playoff results, or in some cases lack thereof, as a blueprint for the future? For example, expanding Andrew Nembhard's role or exploring a change of reinforcements at the 5. I'll let you speak to what you thought of Miles in general in this run, what happened in game 4, where you leave in the Miles Turner exit survey of what you've witnessed over these 3 rounds.
So,
and then speak to the broader question.
I do think Pascal isn't really part of this because if he's staying, he's a huge part. And maybe they end up trading, a max contract or slightly less than max contract version of Pascal down the road. But if Pascal's on the Pacers, he's a big part of the team, presumably, at least for the foreseeable future. And I think Nembhard is like rock solid. He's starting lineup. He's 2. Tyrese is rock solid. Nesmith and Turner become the swing pieces. And Turner, you probably could tell, listener, viewer, throughout the course of the postseason, underwhelmed me. And I think the 5 is a place where the Pacers could, if they become the best version of themselves, this team, Miles Turner maybe isn't necessarily that guy. Maybe that's too harsh, and maybe I'm taking for granted some of the unique. He's a unique driver at his position. He is one of the better shooters at his position, but the defense just really waxed and waned. And I think playing with Tyrese, and I know Tyrese has commented in the past about how much he appreciates Miles' game, I do think that position is created for quite well. And I do think that you could get a similar level of offensive punch. Because as good as Turner is as a shooter, teams still don't freak out about it because he's a center shooting the basketball. I do think you could get a similar level of offensive punch. And I think you could upgrade the defense. And I think there's a money aspect there too. I think that is a swing position for the Pacers. I think that's kind of where I'm at.
His playoff run was definitely a journey. I think one of the coolest moments from a fan perspective, I'm certain, was when Gainbridge Fieldhouse was chanting his name when he made all the 3s against the Milwaukee Bucks. And that is in part why I do like the partnership between he and Pascal offensively, because what Pascal did against the cross match isn't something that Miles had the benefit of with other front court partners. And once that cross match went away and Miles was shooting against Brook Lopez and drop, yeah, that mattered. Like what he and Tyrese were able to do in the pick and roll affected that series for sure, to the point where Doc Rivers came out with the switching scheme in game 5 that gave them some problems. But then again, when they tried to switch, even with Brook Lopez, it gave the Pacers some problems. And that was an issue here in the Celtics series. The Celtics series was not turned out. I said in the preview that Miles was either going to border on being unguardable, or he was going to border on, and this is going to sound like a very harsh word, but unplayable at times. And there were moments of both. In game 1, he came out like a house of fire, had 18 points in the first half. That was mainly against Al Horford and Luke Cornett in drop coverage. Once that cross match occurred, it became a lot more difficult for him to navigate. He had some stronger moments at the beginning of game 3 at home where he was more assertive looking for those post touches. As we talked about, a lot of it for him is just weaponizing his touch. Some of that was on autopilot a little bit, where Derek White's like, I've seen you do this 2 other times. I know you're going to do it again. And now I'm just sitting on that move and I'm blocking it as a guard. That was somewhat problematic for me. And I do want to give him a bit of a break because I do know that the back was affecting him. They all talked about that. And I will also add to this that Rick Carlisle said he has a lot of love for Miles Turner and that what he's able to do is very unique and very special. I don't think that there's an answer on this roster in terms of us both talking about how I do think that Miles's defense has shown a little bit of a drop off. That's an upgrade over Miles. I don't think if you're playing Jalen Smith or Isaiah Jackson that you're getting better production than what you're getting from Miles Turner at either end of the floor. But Miles, in comparison to himself, I don't think is defending at the same exact level.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really tough in that series against the Boston Celtics, especially in game 4, when, like I said, he went back to being guarded by Al Horford and he popped a total of 4 times and took 1 3 out of the pop. And he finished that series with more turnovers than 3-point attempts. He led the Indiana Pacers in turnovers against the Boston Celtics. It's problematic in addition to what some of the rebounding issues are, because I know a lot of people wanted to be like, why can't Rick get this team to show more gumption on defense and to be pursuing the ball more as rebounding? Well, that's not just a Rick Carlisle thing. That'd be a Frank Vogel thing. That'd be a Nate McMillan thing. That'd be a Nate Bjorkgren thing. That'd be a Rick Carlisle thing. I've seen this through 4 coaching staffs. And if that's what the rebounding is still going to be at the 5 issue, I guess this is my long-winded way of saying I've seen Miles definitively improve over his tenure with the Indiana Pacers. And I want to give him a lot of credit for that. He didn't used to be a roll man at all. He didn't used to be able to do much against the switch. If you switched it, the pick and pop was over. He wasn't doing anything against it. I've seen teams make adjustments against him. However, I leave the playoffs with a lot more question marks at the 5 spot than I entered them with. That would be my grand takeaway there.
And the last thing I'll say is that we see it in the Western Conference Finals right now. And it's not true all the time, but it is something that you see happen quite often, is that Derek Lively, Daniel Gafford, Dwight Powell, ranging from like Gafford has had a pretty poor playoffs. He had a really fun finish to the last game or to game 3. Lively had obviously been incredible, and guards can add so much to what bigs do. Tyrese, and I hate that this isn't basketball, but this is team building. Tyrese, perhaps the same way that Kyle Lowry got Bismack Biyombo paid $16 million a year, the same way that Chris Boucher averaged like 16 points per game when he was running a lot of pick and rolls with Kyle Lowry. Just good guards. They just need a guy. And Tyrese, being one of the best pick and roll ball handlers, I know statistically the best, but one of the best, just if you're looking at without the stats, in a handful of guys in the league, if you're looking that like, where's a position that we might be able to get more out of from on a dollar per dollar basis or something, like Tyrese might be a guy who's like, I turn the $6 million big man into a $19 million big man because I'm Tyrese Halliburton. That could be a thing. I know that's not fun, and I sound like it. I know what I sound like, but that's like, I'm thinking about the question.
Never forget the series where Solomon Hill and Bismack Biyombo both got paid.
Yes. Unbelievable.
Paul Glennon March. Caitlin, I'm very bullish on the Pacers' future. Mathurin missing the playoffs was disappointing, and I wish I could have seen him in the playoffs. If the Pacers keep roughly the same roster as this year and a playoff series, what do you think his role would be for the Pacers?
I think this kind of goes back to, we talked about Mathurin. I don't know if the defense is a big swing thing. You've seen much more of Mathurin defensively than I have. And anytime I've seen, like, if I can think about like a 7-game sample where I'm like, I saw some really interesting things that were boosted by athleticism, and then I just saw some appalling things. And maybe that is Mathurin defensively, maybe that isn't. I can't speak to that very much, but we talked about and we yearned a little bit for like, wow, Ben Mathurin would have just blown up this side of the defense and he would have gotten into the teeth of it. And the cascading effects of that would have been pretty large for these Pacers, especially even as they scored the ball well. We've congratulated them on being a diverse offense and achieving. They still had stretches. Mathurin could have perhaps made them like almost immune to droughts, which is a really cool thing. Just his presence to blow open a whole side of the defense and to get to the rim and just get to the free throw line. It's a big deal. It's probably not something you want to like turn your nose up at, as much as other things are like maybe tough with Mathurin. Like that's a huge deal. Defensively, I can't speak to it very much.
I think that there's stampede cuts that Ben could have added into these series, especially with some of the help that Tyrese was seeing at the nail, that would have made a difference in his ability to pierce the defense for sure. Also, just his overall persistence to get to the rim.
He has gumption. That's a man with gumption.
Yeah, I mean, you can say a lot of things about Ben, but he's not going to be hesitant to get to the rim. Sometimes there's questions about what he does once he gets there, but he's going to get the ball there.
Ooh, wait, can I also say something?
Mm-hmm.
For the rookie who came into the league and said LeBron James isn't better than me until I see it, I would like to see that guy in the playoffs. I would just like to see something.
And that's what I was getting ready to say, is that you saw it up close. The guy was shooting over double teams and had some of the most incredible shot making I've seen in that game against the Raptors this year. He also had some very woeful defensive possessions in that game with Agbaji and Grady Dick back cutting him fairly often in certain situations. We also showed some of the clip package in the Celtics preview series where he and Tyrese were having a lot of miscommunications on some basic horns chin plays. So what you're seeing, and I think what you're taking into Mathern is true. Rick said yesterday he thinks he still has star level potential, but in watching the playoffs with Ben being injured, that two of the most important things for Ben are going to be at the defensive end and his ability to make quick decisions. And these are things that I pointed out throughout the year, because I always compare Ben to a trapeze artist. He's let go of the rung behind him. He's not the same rookie who saw obstacles as scoring opportunities only for himself. His pass rate out of drives only improved like a little bit. Like it's up to like 25%, which is higher than last year. But there were times where he was trying to make the right play. He just didn't actually make the right play. But there was more intention behind it. Yeah, there's only like, we're talking about like Joel Embiid and Kelly Oubre and Jaren Jackson Jr. having lower pass rates.
When Kyrie was playing on the Nets with that incredible spacing, I believe his was like 28%, where James Harden and KD are pulling it out. But I think the sweet spot right now in the NBA is maybe like I think it's like 55, 60% pass out rate is where you see a lot of the best drivers. 25% is crazy.
Yeah, I was in the teens last year, I believe. But,
oh my God.
I mean, I wrote an article about this over the summer that because he plays so well out of triple threat, his go-to move is the jab and go to his left, and then he can counter it. He's very good. People always ask me for comps. In terms of his ability to play out of triple threat, he's very similar to Jimmy Butler in terms of the work that he puts in before he puts the ball on the floor. That being said, he still struggles to make left-handed passes. So he's so good at, screen rejection, rip and go to the left baseline. But once he gets there, I had cataloged a year ago, he had never made a pass with his left hand to the opposite side of the court. So that's where some of it becomes easier to load up on the drives. This being said, 2 games, inflection points. He plays against the Milwaukee Bucks. He knocks the ball away from Giannis twice. He's on Chris Middleton. He prevents Chris Middleton from turning middle. He has defensive tools. It's just seeing it more consistently. And then with the decision-making, I realize a lot of players probably have good inflection points against the Detroit Pistons, but stay with me. After they played the Los Angeles Lakers, Tyrese getting blitzed a lot after that in-season tournament run. In that game against Detroit in the fourth quarter, very telling. For one, he made a pass with his left hand from the top of the key around somebody's ear against the switch, which was great, although it was not off the drive and the move. But they ran the same play 4 times in a row, and I'm not going to go into the machinations of the play, but he made 4 different reads out of it in a row. That was a very good step forward for Benedict Mathurin. That being said, it was out of a play, and he was out there with TJ McConnell. And because of what play it was, typically when Ben cuts across Iverson screens to the other side of the floor, that's to throw a boomerang play back to Tyrese. But because TJ was out there, they were running it for that action to be run out of the second side for Ben. So Ben got to stretch his legs and do a little bit more of that. I still think that Ben is a player who plays better out of sets than he is somebody playing out of reads, which is more often how the Pacers prefer to play. They would rather play in flow game. They would rather play with reads. And that's where I wrote at the beginning of the year that Ben stands out when he fits in. That's what it's going to have to be. And that adjustment is difficult for a player who you can also say, he made a shot over Kristaps Porzingis in the game that Tyrese was out against Boston in January, I believe. It was on a sideline out of bounds play. They called it for Ben. He was moving into the corner. He created separation. At the time, they called a foul on Porzingis. Later on, the last 2-minute report said it wasn't a foul. Point being, Rick said after the game, he's the only player on our team who could have taken that shot. And it was true because I looked up every time they ran that play and every time a team switched against them, nobody else had ever gotten a shot off in that situation. So Ben has a very unique skill set. it just doesn't always completely mesh quite yet unless he continues to take strides forward with the defense and his overall feel for the game. Because there's still some times where it's like, and you could tell this at Arizona, that plays would be run for him a lot because he was the best player at Arizona, and he doesn't always fully understand that just because a play is called for me doesn't mean the shot has to be for me. Although I do think, like I said, he's let go of the rung behind him. He just hasn't fully grasped the next one, and I can't tell people yet if he will grasp the next one. He might, and like Rick said, if he does, he has star caliber player potential. I just don't know if that's going to happen, and I don't think, based on what I've seen, like I said, between the Tyrese and Ben chemistry, the Tyrese Buddy chemistry, the Tyrese Nembhard chemistry, Ben would rank third on that list in terms of who best complements Tyrese. That's not me downgrading Ben. It's just in terms of what Tyrese needs around him. That's just the way that I currently see things.
Yeah. He's not easy like Nembhard is. Although Nembhard is I don't clench my teeth when I get angry. I clench my teeth when I'm like, that's when I clench my teeth. Ben Mathurin is a player who makes me clench my teeth.
For sure.
I like that. Decision making is really important, though. I know skill set's really important, but decision making goes a long way.
Well, now we've reached into the fun portion of the questions where a lot of people have questions about you, as it turns out. One that I didn't give you in the list that actually got asked like 2 weeks ago that I definitely wanted to address. Kyle Taylor, what are the most fun basketball games you've seen live in person? And he says, I asked this as someone who just went to Madison Square Garden for Game 7, and it was the best atmosphere I've ever been a part of.
So I think the best game I've been to was the game where Bradley Beal punched Draymond Green in the head. And it was fantastic because Jody Meeks was a part of it, and it was, to that point, Golden State's biggest comeback ever. They came back against the Wizards, and it was awesome because it was a really fun game, and obviously the Warriors are very good at basketball at that point in time, like one of the best teams I've ever seen in my life. And on top of that, it was really funny because in Oracle Arena, they showed Bradley Beal punch Draymond Green, and everyone booed. They very conveniently left out that Draymond Green had kicked Bradley Beal in the balls prior to that. So, and I didn't see it. I was in the arena, and I also happened to look at Twitter, and people had brought up the replay, and I was like, oh, that's why he punched him. Many people in the arena obviously were not seeing what I see, and it was very clever by the game ops people to cut out Draymond's crime. And that was the first NBA game I ever saw because I grew up in Saskatchewan. Famously, Saskatchewan is not close to any basketball team, any NBA team at the very least. There's a professional team now in the CEBL, the Canadian Elite Basketball League, the Saskatchewan Rattlers. Yeah, that was my first game. It was super fun.
The first NBA game you saw was in San Francisco?
Yeah, at Oracle Arena.
Going to need to know more details about that eventually. How far away is Saskatchewan from Minnesota? Or Minneapolis?
Actually, I've made that drive. It is 14 hours.
Oh, wow. Okay, that's further than I did. That's definitely further than I thought you were.
It's like, it's north. Anywhere in Saskatchewan is north. Toronto is pretty far south. Toronto's farther south than a lot of parts of America, but it's farther south than Minneapolis, for example. Saskatchewan, where I grew up, not.
The best game that I've seen live in person, I think, would have been when the Pacers played the Spurs, Victor Oladipo's first season. And he made his first game winner at the end of that game. And the crowd's reaction to it, especially given the narratives about Paul George and that Victor was coming over and very quickly looked like, he had so much more control over his athleticism. He was making self-created threes. And for him to do it in that moment was like a really nice narrative contrast to what had become a talking point about Paul George and not being a clutch player at the end of games. So that was cool to witness the fan reaction to that. And then also just selfishly, I got to go with my family to that game, and my nephew at the time, he was really chanting along and saying Depot with a player who was sitting next to him. So I appreciated that, and I'm going to remember that one for a while. So that's my answer for that one. Life enthusiast, this is a question for you. Samson, what was the least expected yet most refreshing, interesting, insert whatever adjective, aspect of the agrarian bucket getters during your coverage of them?
The diversity with which they scored, I thought was good. I lamented on this podcast how sometimes it was scheme over skill and stuff like that. And I thought they really figured that out by the end. And while, once again, injuries helped finish this for the Pacers not having Tyrese, they also helped pave certain aspects of it. And it was easier to beat the Bucks without Giannis than it would have been with him, obviously. I got to see way more of the Pacers than I initially expected, which meant I got to see a diversity of process and a diversity of outcome. And just by proxy of that, I saw this team do way more interesting things. And I saw them find themselves. They didn't find themselves fully defensively, and they didn't all of a sudden calcify into a contending team, but they did really figure out some things that they needed to, and things that I think will help them going forward. Again, as Caitlin said, as Chad Buchanan said, like, it's not linear. They're not guaranteed a run of this caliber next year or a run of any sort, but they figured things out that work and worked at a high level. And that was cool because I observed these Pacers prior to that as a very one-note team, and they had several, I found.
Next part of his question, simple yet vital, plans for both of your off seasons: proprietary popsicle production, YouTube channel creation, marathon, summer league games, enjoying time away from the old leather pumpkin, as he terms it.
Yeah, I try and stay away from like everything basketball consumption. I try and just do my work, and I just try. So that's during the regular season, that's during the playoffs, I just don't listen to stuff about basketball. I did before I worked. I love basketball coverage. I just don't love it anymore. And during the off seasons, I'm like, I went to summer league last year, and like, it was fun because I went with my friends and we went to the Grand Canyon and we played basketball in the desert, and we went to the Tarkanian runs, and us Canadians ran a lot of those American fellas out of the gym down there. So a lot of fun stuff happened, and I didn't find any of it was related to watching Grady Dick at summer league. And I take as much time. So no marathons for me whatsoever. I'm doing one. That's it. Those things are insane. I'm glad I did it. I have a medal. I'm glad. I'll be doing I hope to do some camping. I've been bouldering or rock climbing like 3 times a week. I love it. It's really cool. And long walks, photography, all that kind of stuff. Eat some good food. That's about it. I'm emceeing a wedding before the NBA season starts back up. So maybe that'll be fun too. There's other stuff, but that's the gist.
You have all kinds of curiosities today, things that I now have questions about. I won't be doing any proprietary popsicle production. Hopefully my sister and I can get back out on the road. A sister who wishes to remain anonymous, if you're listening to this, we will be going to the Balloon Festival and the food truck that has popsicles in Bloomington this summer, since you panned that trip that I wanted to take in August. So that is on my to-do list. YouTube channel creation. I have a YouTube channel. You're watching it right now. I never intended to have a YouTube channel, which is something that I will address when we get to the end of this.
I think it would be really funny, not to cut you off, which I'm doing anyway, but it would be really funny if you got so popular on YouTube that you were no longer like a writer, but you became a YouTuber. I would address you as a YouTuber constantly, and I think it would make your brain boil.
You would actually have to address me in order to address me as something. So, as far as summer league games go, Samson's been to more places in my country than I've been. I have yet to be to Las Vegas to watch summer league. I don't anticipate that probably changing this summer either, unless something vastly changes. I would like to have some time off. People know this. I talked about, like, I don't know how NBA players do the playoffs because they're actually doing physical exertion. I'm exhausted right now, and I wasn't playing 48-minute basketball games at the highest freaking level. So I hope at some point I have some downtime. That's very hard to do when you're self-employed, which I just want to tell everybody. Very glad that I am employed and doing this. It's not my intention to be like, wham, feel bad for me. But right now I am tired. So hopefully there is some amount of downtime or a break in between some of what the Pacers have done, given that the run was longer.
I'll take that opportunity to say something, actually. For anybody listening, since I know this isn't a patron exclusive podcast, the reason why I did this work was because I thought, not because I'm not as popular as Caitlin, and I don't aim to be or anything like that, but I thought that she can only do so much work. If there was more work, there'd be more eyes on the Patreon. I don't know anything about conversion or signups, but if you tagged along for it and you enjoyed all of it for free, I would urge you, sign up, because it goes to somebody who is genuinely, in my mind, the best doing it in the world. And I'll fight anybody on that. And I don't care if you think it's Zach Lowe. I don't care if you think it's whoever. I think Caitlin's the best. And she's doing this in this process. The best way to support her is signing up to the Patreon for Basketball She Wrote. I implore anyone who has expendable income. Nobody spend the grocery money on it. But if you have expendable income, I think it's a really good place to put it. And it supports somebody who is not only very good at what she does, but somebody who supports the backbone of analysis in the industry, because untold amounts of people borrow from her. And when she writes something or puts her ideas out, it eventually flows downwards and it makes everybody's analysis better. It makes the coverage better. And she can't get paid through downward flow, only through patrons. So if you want to sign up, I implore you.
This makes me upset with you because you knew that I was overwhelmed before this started, and now I have to carry on with that after that very long and passionate speech. So I'm not going to offer any comment in response to that. Mackie Estelle, can we get Olympic breakdowns from you and Samson?
One or two, I reckon. Probably. I don't know. We have to figure it out. That's not a good answer.
I will say that Andrew Nembhard is going to be playing for Team Canada, and I did enjoy watching Team Canada last summer. I thoroughly did. Those were games that I tuned in and watched. I like watching FIBA basketball in general, so I'm usually watching it. If we were to do coverage of it, or whatever coverage I do, because I did cover what Tyrese was doing with Team USA last summer, it will be more difficult for me to do it this go around because the Olympics with NBC really cracks down on using their clips in terms of being able to replicate exactly what Samson and I have done with this, or even if I was doing it on my own, it will be more challenging. So I guess I'll leave that one there. Eric Joseph Leffler, how much of the Basketball She Wrote salary cap can we offer to keep Samson on the squad? We can't just let him walk, all caps, exclamation point.
I'm like Andrew Nembhard, maybe. Second rounder, I come in. You worry about the money later. You just enjoy what's been happening.
I'll tell people I would offer Samson the max if he wanted to do this. I think in reverse that he's that good at his job, and I was very fortunate to be publishing work that he did at the end of all of the games and to have him sitting and doing these podcasts with me. People know I was doing little videos throughout the season. I was talking over the film. They weren't as good as the things that we did together, because I prefer to have conversation, number one, but also because Samson saw things that I didn't see in the clips. He pointed things out. He pointed out trends about the team. Sometimes when you have somebody come in with fresh eyes, hopefully I've done this with some of the stuff that I've done with him. I hope that like I can point out something about the Raptors and perhaps he can reflect off of it. And with the two of us seeing it, it becomes a little bit better of a listening experience for the people who are watching it. And I definitely think that was the case, at least on my end of it.
It is my earnest hope that my being here helps convince enough people that the rim run is better than the short roll.
I could still do like a 2-hour podcast just on that topic. I know that I could. Lawnster, any chance we can convert Samson to being a Pacer fan? He seems to love our team already. And then he concurrently asks, what was your favorite moment of this season for you, the playoffs? And what was your worst moment of this season, meaning the playoffs, and why?
So I've always had hesitation with the term empath. because I thought that was the baseline of most people's existence. It's like, you have empathy, right? Surely you do. But the way I watch basketball or kind of consume basketball is like this. I see the conversations that are being had about players, and I feel bad about players who get, crapped on all the time. And I hate when discourse shifts too far towards a certain guy. SB Nation posted an article just recently where a guy is basically doing a psychological breakdown, like armchair psychology, on why he thinks Karl Anthony Towns isn't well liked. Insanity. I hate that type of stuff. And my favorite moment of the postseason was in Game 7 against the Knicks, when Tyrese Haliburton got rid of the ball and ran 30 feet to the opposite end of the court and just got the ball back and launched the three and hit it. Because I was like, this is a guy who played injured. Obviously, he played injured. And then when you play injured, everyone says your injured self is the new normal, and now you're bad and you suck. And if you don't play injured, like OG Anunoby did once after playing
Can
with
I slightly add in here that Tyrese said yesterday at his presser that for people who avidly watch and study his game, that he was never 100% off of that after that hamstring injury. Continue.
Point made. The joke I was about to make was that OG Anunoby played with a broken hand and for like 3 weeks and still had his coach, Nick Nurse, say that OG doesn't play injured. And nobody cares unless you do good things. And Tyrese had a whale of a Game 7. And I just saw the way people talked about him constantly and all that kind of stuff. And no player deserves, kind words more than other players or whatnot. But it was nice to see Tyrese have a big game when everybody was holding their breath, myself included, waiting for the big game. And he got in Madison Square Garden. That was cool to see. That was my favorite moment, I think. Of course, Nembhard's, that game winner is incredible too. But yeah, that's my favorite. Least favorite, worst moment. Maybe when OG got injured. I really want to see OG versus Pascal. And it was a little bit heartbreaking to hear, talking about playing injured. Pascal was like, oh, I wasn't sure how to play against OG in Game 7 because, like, they're friends. He's known him for years. And he was like, the way you're moving is insane to me. So I don't know to attack you or not because I don't feel good about your physical well-being. That was the worst moment.
And maybe someday they would like to be teammates again. I mean,
there are questions that we've answered or talked about on the podcast that could be erased by one player's presence. That's actually, yes, that should be what the Pacers do.
One of my favorite moments is when there was a camera showing them talking to OG behind a towel at the end of that series. That was a stellar moment.
Can I say, sometimes that stuff is real. Right before Jakob Poeltl got traded, he was in Toronto. I was covering that game. I stumbled upon Jakob and Pascal talking in the tunnel as I was going around taking my pictures, doing all that kind of stuff. I won't divulge anything, but players talk.
My favorite two moments, it's low-hanging fruit, would be the game winners. The game winner from Tyrese and the game winner from Nembhard, mainly because both of them were the types of game winners that you wouldn't have necessarily expected from them. I realized that Nembhard could make a three-pointer as a game winner against the Lakers a year ago, but the fact that it was from 30 feet and it was self-created, and he answered the question about standing that far off of the line, and we now, or at least I now, finally know why he does that as often as he does. He had made 5 unassisted threes all year. He had yet to make a three from that distance. Very big play and showing how he could be complementary to Tyrese in a late game situation. Also, Tyrese, as we had talked about many times, that he went in a place where the defense didn't want him to go, and also how it highlighted how cerebral of a player he is, anticipating that Chris Middleton would go under, anticipating that Patrick Beverley would weak him left, using the double cross to get there, and then, squeezing through the pinhole in order to get that floater to go. Definitely big steps for both of them there. And then my worst moment would just go back to what I already said, that how often Samson was peer pressuring me to use the word feckless. I didn't really appreciate, especially because of how accurate it was.
Yeah. I love
Okay.
language.
So there's one last question and then one surprise that I didn't tell you about after the questions are done. James, you two have such a fun vibe together. I enjoyed your chemistry and banter as much as the basketball content. Question: given that you both cover different teams and are from different countries, what's the backstory on how you became friends and linked up to collaborate? And I think it would be really funny. We're not going to do this, but I really wish we could have written down what our answers to this are ahead of time and then seen how different they are. Because I think that our answers are going to probably be different to this, but I'll let you say, how did we become friends and how did we link up for this collaboration?
Evan, I used to do a podcast called Bouncing Around with Evan Gualberto, which if you enjoy the process of Caitlin pulling up clips and like doing stuff as walking through them, myself and Evan did a very intensive podcast where we'd each pick a game that week and we'd break down a game, the film of it, and we talk about set actions. We talked about what worked, and it required a lot of editing, and it was truly like a lot of work, but it was a very, very good basketball podcast. It wasn't feasible to do it anymore due to time and the intersection of money and time. Evan introduced me to Caitlin's work. I really liked it. As we all know, I don't get introduced to much work because I don't go looking. So Evan introduced me. And then I asked Caitlin, well, Evan and I talked about it. My voice cracked. Evan and I talked about it. And then I asked Caitlin to come on the podcast. And then that started the process of, I don't know, knowing about each other's work. And you know about someone's work, then you know about them as a person, if you're lucky. You know about someone as a person, hopefully you like them, hopefully you become friends. That seems like the story.
I think that's how we knew of each other. I don't think that's when we became friends. You said a couple podcasts ago that you were like, I don't know why the two of us reference the Loving Basketball podcast so much. I think the aftermath of that podcast is why we became, or when we became friends.
You're like, someone else is noticing this post up thing. Cool.
No, I think it's what happened after the podcast, which I won't go into detail on, but Samson answered some questions that I had industry related and listened to me talk to him for like a half hour when he really didn't need to. And we didn't really know each other that well at the time. And then also around the draft, he reached out and asked me how some things were going. And I think from then on, we've been friends since then, or at least the way that I envision friends.
If anybody wants to know what I said to her regarding the industry, I told her, tough luck, do better, get good.
Yeah, that was it. At least the way that I envision friendships, we might see that differently. But and as far as linking up to do this collaboration, I guess it was after we did the Pascal Siakam podcast. At the end of it, Samson had kind of made an off-the-cuff comment about like, oh, maybe I'll watch or cover the Pacers as a little hobby. And I said, I'll pay you to do freelance podcasting. And then later on, he brought it up and he had texted me. And he was like, I wasn't joking about that. And I was basically like, I wasn't joking about it either. I didn't know if he would actually come on and do it for 3 full rounds, but very fortunate that he was willing to.
Yeah. It was just like little hobby. It wasn't a little hobby. It was like, it was a thing. And then, just happy to have done it.
Okay. So the last surprise that I have is I have to tie in popsicle related content because I've promised this on the Patreon listings for people
one
to
moment.
sign up and join.
I have something superior to a popsicle. Go ahead.
No, you have to tell me yours first because this is a surprise that I'm going to have to show on the screen. An ice cream sandwich. No. I thought maybe you had actually gone and bought popsicles to commemorate this occasion. And instead, you're just rubbing ice cream in my face. Well, this was the actual surprise. So people will know I started taking popsicle trips with my sister shortly after we started this. And we went to Nicey Treat, which I had wanted to go to. There's 2 locations in Indy. And during the time when I was unemployed for a month, I actually drove to Indy for the specific reason of going to Nicey Treat. And when I got there, I found out they were closed. And like, given everything else that was going on in my life, I was prepared to like put on sackcloth and ashes. I had driven all the way there and they had closed for like just that week and I didn't get to go. So my sister and I did that. We went there. It's my favorite food location in Indy. And I've had to make a couple trips to Indy over the past 2 weeks. I was there for game 4 on whatever day that was now. All the times are blending together. And because it was Memorial Day, they opened early enough that I could stop there on my way into downtown Indy. They opened at noon, just my luck. And I had told Samson, we had talked about the fact that if the Pacers advanced to the finals, he might finally take me up on my offer to come to Indiana. And I was going to take him to the popsicle place. And as we now know, with him eating the ice cream treat, he was like, do they have ice cream there? And I said, they have ice cream bars in addition to popsicles. Everything is an icy pop. So I took this picture for you while I was there of the menu. And I thought it would be fun for the last popsicle content and the last thing that we did, that if we had gone to Nicey Treat together, which flavor would you have picked? The top row with all the V's on it is because those are the vegan options. So there's pink lemonade, there's peach, there's the Pog, which is my personal favorite, passion fruit, orange, guava. There's cherry limeade, there's grape, there's mango, there's pineapple, margarita. Good selection. But because you are probably going to pick one of the ice cream ones, there's banana, there's vanilla, there's dark chocolate sea salt, there's key lime, there's strawberry cream, there's toasted coconut, and then the last one that you probably can't read is there's orange sour cream.
I think I'd go strawberry cream. There's a place in Toronto called Craig's Cookies, and they had strawberry and cream flavor of cookies, and it was so good that I think I'd pick strawberry cream.
I'm shocked by this development. I was so happy when I went in there and saw that they had the orange sour cream selection, because you told me your favorite flavor was orange and that you liked creamsicles.
Sour though, how does that factor in?
It's still going to be a sweet popsicle. It's just a unique.
Well,
flavor
maybe I go up, they give you a little spoon. I'm like, that's really good. But the
It's
sour
not
put
ice
me
cream.
off.
It's a nicey pop on a bar. It's an ice cream bar. On a
Okay,
stick.
well, then maybe I'm getting 2, and I'm risking it for the sour of it all. But strawberry cream sounds awesome.
The last time I was there, I had 2 of the passion fruit orange guava because I get really excited when that's on the board. And I bought 2 of them, and then I attempted to drive while I had 2 of them.
This right here, this run-of-the-mill boxed Chapman's ice cream bar, this is better than any popsicle I've ever had in my life.
It's because you haven't had good ones. You haven't had the handcrafted ones that my sister has made. You have not been to Nicey Treat, and you haven't been. I mean, you said you had palettas. I have a hard time believing that an ice cream sandwich out of a box is better than a paletta you had in Mexico.
Mortadella. Panzanito. Mwah. Perfection, that ice cream bar.
I'm very disappointed that this is the way you chose to end this run of this podcast. By rubbing this in my face about how bad popsicles are. In the comments, please tell Samson he's wrong. But anyways, to close this out, this is the end of it. We've closed out the Pacers playoff run. I've done my popsicle surprise that didn't really seem to impress you that much. Do you have any closing thoughts that you want to share about what's your basketball hero exit opinion, or anything else that you just want to tell people about you and your work?
No. I just I hope people subscribe to your Patreon. It was I revere your work. I think you are the best in the world at it. So to share it was meaningful, and to learn and to borrow from you, I will keep on doing that. Very glad to have shared the platform.
I will close it out by saying I appreciate that everybody, like, just to put it out there, like, I never intended to have a YouTube channel. I started this with like less than 30 subscribers on YouTube. Literally, I don't even have a profile picture on it. It's my name because there's way too many Caitlin Coopers in this world with random 4-digit number at the end. And the only reason I ever had it was to embed clips during the Victor Oladipo season into articles at Indie Cornrows, because that's what was compatible with Chorus at the time before you could use Streamable and other ways of embedding and using film footage. So I threw this on here and made these public simply because Samson agreed to do it, and I thought it was the right thing for these to be public since he was contributing his time and his talent. And a lot of you guys watched it and kept watching it. And that was from other fan bases too. So if anybody from the Knicks or the Celtics or the Bucks or any other teams that, you know, your team wasn't in the playoffs and you watched this, I certainly appreciate it. Because a little story that I will tell about Samson, which hopefully he doesn't get mad that I reveal. I mean, he made it public, so I guess whatever. Is like last year at the beginning of the season, somebody on Twitter was like, I really want you to start a YouTube channel. And I quote tweeted it and I was like, I write, I do podcasting. I'm never going to be on YouTube. That's not going to happen. I'm not doing a YouTube channel. And Samson replied to me saying that, and he had recorded part of my Isaiah Jackson article and shared it on Twitter of him reading part of it, because those are the types of things that he does as a friend. And then here we are. And he, like, I put this out on Twitter, but like him, I don't think that there's another thing quite like this out here that the two of us did together, especially not with the way that he pushed me to take the lead on it and that he continued to elevate the conversation. So I really appreciate that, and a lot of different ways, and people can take from that what they will. And just a general big thank you to everybody that followed and read both of our work during the playoffs. And I'll leave it there. Till next time, whenever that is.